Hey there, Bible nerds. Welcome back to Chapters and Chuckles by Kaye, where we dive into the Bible chapter by chapter. So this is it, the series finale of our journey through the book of Numbers. Can you believe we've made it to episode 7? And for episode 7, I'll be covering 6 chapters, which is, chapters 31 through 36. So now our story reaches its climactic finish on the plains of Moab. But don't worry, we'll go out with a bang. Quite literally, there's a battle coming and a few laughs. Today's episode will be a bit like a finale fireworks show, war drama, land deals, long travel diaries, legal twists, and heartfelt reflections. Plus, we'll set you up with a cliffhanger for what comes next in the biblical saga. So, and by the way, the next series is going to be on the book of Deuteronomy. So go ahead and grab your drink, get cozy, and let's dive in. All right, chapter 31. This episode opens on a tense command from the Lord. So it's payback time. God tells Moses, avenge the Israelites on the Midianites. Afterward, you shall be gathered to your people. So in other words, this is Moses' last mission, a final holy war against Midian, after which Moses will die. So, it's a big deal. So Moses doesn't miss a beat. He rallies a strike force of 1,000 men from each tribe, so 12,000 total are conscripted for battle. So leading the charge spiritually is Phinehas, son of the high priest Eleazar, the same zealous Phinehas who appeared a couple times in chapter 25 to stop a plague. So this time, Phinehas goes to war armed not just with weapons, but with the vessel of the sanctuary and the trumpets for sounding the alarm. So yes, you heard that right. He's bringing holy objects and trumpets. Nothing says battle like a priestly trumpet squad. So picture Phinehas as a one-man pep band, tooting the trumpet to signal, that God himself is going into battle with Israel. So talk about morale boosting. So off they march, these 12,000 Israelites to execute the Lord's vengeance on Midian. So action scene. The battle is swift and decisive. The Israelites did battle against Midian as the Lord had commanded Moses and killed every male. They strike down the 5 Midianite king named Evi, Rechem, Zur, Hur, and Reba. And one more infamous casualty, Balaam, son of Beor. So yes, that Balaam, if you remember, Mr. Talking Donkey from a few episodes ago. So it turns out Balaam didn't ride off into a noble sunset. He stuck around with the Midianites, likely advising them on how to undermine Israel. So bad move, for him. Balaam, he meets his end by the sword, caught up in the very conflict he helped spark. So fun twist, the guy who once said he couldn't curse Israel because God wouldn't let him ended up cursed by his own choices. So long, Balaam. Thanks for the memorable donkey dialogue. So with the Midianite men eliminated, the Israelites take everything as plunder. We're talking cattle, flocks, goods, gold. If it wasn't nailed down, it's now property of Israel. They also captured the Midianite women and children as captives. Every town and tent encampment the Midianites' head is burned to ashes. It's a total, So picture the victorious Israelite soldiers rounding up herds and sheep and oxen with wagons full of loot, leading a long procession of captives. The war party then treks back to camp on the plains of Moab, where Moses, Eleazar, and all the community leaders come out to greet the returning army. But instead of a hero's welcome, the scene gets heated. Moses spots the captives, particularly the women, and he absolutely blows a gasket. So Moses yells at the officers, like, have you allowed all the women to live? Like, his face is turning red, veins popping, why is he so upset? He points at the Midianite women and practically spits. These women, on Balaam's advice, made the Israelites act treacherously against the Lord in the affair of Peor. So there's the backstory. Not long ago, in Numbers chapter 25, Israelite men fell into idolatry because some Midianite and Moabite women seduced them into worshiping the idol Baal of Peor. That sin brought a raging plague that killed 24,000 Israelites until Phinehas stopped it. And who gave that evil advice? Ding, ding, ding. Balaam, the very prophet we just mentioned. So Moses is basically saying, like, hello, these are the exact women who were involved in that disaster. We just risked life and limb to stop Israel from sinning, and you bring home the temptation crew as prisoners. So in modern terms, like, guys, you had one job. Moses' anger is white hot because he doesn't want to repeat of that plague-inducing fiasco. So the solution is grim. Moses orders that all the male children among the captives be killed, and every woman who has ever slept with a man be killed as well. Only the young girls who were still virgins are to be spared and kept alive as servants or potential wives for the Israelites. It's a tough, sobering moment. One of those Old Testament scenes that's hard for us to swallow, and there's a lot of us. So in the context, Moses is ensuring that those who directly participate in seducing Israel to idolatry are removed to protect Israel from the future spiritual corruption. Still, it's okay to feel this is harsh. Ancient warfare was brutal, and this was a holy war scenario. So, so the Israel soldiers follow Moses' order. We're not given all the grisly details, thankfully, but it's clear that judgment was carried out. So after this difficult task, Moses shifts focus to purification. The soldiers who've killed people or touched the dead must undergo ritual cleansing. Moses says, everyone who has slain someone or touched a corpse will stay outside the camp for 7 days. Purify yourselves on the 3rd and 7th day. Then do the same for your captives. So, all the booty, clothing articles of leathers or wood, anything must also be purged of ritual impurity. At this point, Eleazar the priest steps up to explain the purification protocol. Objects that can withstand fire, like gold, silver, bronze, iron, tin, lead, must be passed through fire to be cleansed, and then additionally purified with a special water of purification. Items that would burn or melt should be purified with water alone, and everyone has to wash their clothes on the 7th day before entering camp. So imagine the scene. A week-long scrubbing and fumigation operation outside the camp, soldiers washing up, smoke rising from fires as metal loot is melted or scorched to sterilize it. The message is clear. Even though this was a God-ordained victory, contact with death and foreign idols defiles a person. So before a community can celebrate, they have to get spiritually and physically clean. Finally, after purification, it's time to divide the spoils. And oh boy, are there spoils. So the loot is totaled and it's massive. So 675,000 sheep, 72,000 cattle, 61,000 donkeys, 32,000 human captives, which are the young women. And that's right, 32,000 people, now servants or slaves, spared from Midian. Midian must have been a larger coalition of tribes because those numbers are huge. God instructs Moses to split everything 50-50. Half of the 12,000 soldiers who fought and half of the rest of the Israelite community. So the soldiers don't get to hog all the goodies. Everyone back home gets an equal share of the blessing because the victory was on Israel's behalf. How fair is that? But there's more. From the soldiers' half, they must present a tribute to the Lord. 1 item out of every 500, which is about 0.2% is to be set apart from God and given to the priest Eleazar. From the communities have a larger portion. 1 out of every 50, which about 2%, is to be given to the Levites who take care of the tabernacle. So the priests and Levites receive some of the plunder and holy offering. Essentially, God gets to honor the first cut as a sign that this victory was by his hand and for his honor. So Moses and Eleazar do the math and distribute the spoils accordingly. The text even details God's portion. From the soldiers' half, the Lord's tribute came to 675 sheep, 72 cattle, 61 donkeys, and 32 persons, which were handed over to Eleazar as holy offerings. Side note, those 32 persons given to the priest were likely integrated as servants dedicated to the tabernacle. A tough fate, but probably better than being outright slaves elsewhere, So from the Israelites' half, Moses took the 2% and gave it to the Levites as ordered. Everything is done by the book, ensuring both the warriors and the stay-at-home folks and the Lord's servant are all benefit from the victory. It's a big job dividing nearly 1 million animals, but hey, after organizing Israel for 40 years, Moses can handle a little arithmetic, a little math, a little number. That's nothing. So, just when you think the chapter's over, we get a touching epilogue. So the military officers. I don't know why I was thinking emperor and officer, and then I kind of combined them. Officers. The military officers, commanders over the thousands and hundreds, come forward to Moses with an unexpected report. They say, "We have counted our men and not one of us is missing." Not a single Israelite soldier died in that battle. Zero casualty on Israel's side. 12,000 went out, 12,000 came back. This was no ordinary war. It was an overwhelming, miraculous victory with total preservation of the troops. Like, how crazy is that? But to God, nothing is crazy, really. Like, anything is possible. But to think about it, like, not one out of the 12,000. But, only God. Only God. So they present Moses and Eleazar with, So the commanders are so grateful that they bring a special offering to God, and they present Moses and Eleazar with gold jewelry they personally took from the enemy. So armlets, bracelets, rings, earrings, necklaces. Every soldier's war booty of gold is pulled together as an offering to the Lord. They say this is to make atonement for ourselves before the Lord, effectively thanking God for his protection and acknowledging his hand in the victory. Moses and Eleazar accept the gold, which weighs in at 16,750 shekels, which is about hundreds of pounds of gold. And they put it in the tent of meeting as a memorial for Israel. It will stand as a physical reminder of what God did in the Midianite war, much like a trophy in God's showcase. So can we pause to appreciate this? Like, Israel has fought a fierce battle and didn't lose a single soldier. That's virtually unheard of especially in ancient warfare. So no wonder the soldiers were compelled to give a thanks offering. It's a beautiful example of gratitude. They didn't pat themselves on the back. They ran to give God the glory and the gold. Give God the, glory that he deserves. And with that, chapter 31 comes to a close. It's a mix of triumph and sober reality. They didn't pat themselves. Oh wait, I'd already said that. So the Midianites are defeated. Balaam's saga ends, and Israel is purged and enriched. And Moses edges one step closer to the end of his journey. That's just wow, right? Wow. All right, fun fact corner. So remember Balaam, right? The prophet who could encourage Israel, but then advise Midian on how to tempt them. So as I've mentioned, in this chapter, he got killed in the battle. Jewish tradition and some later scriptures fill in the blanks. Balaam had suggested the plan to seduce Israel into sin, figuring if they sin, God himself would push them. So that's very sneaky, right? For a while, it worked. A plague broke out. But Balaam's plot ultimately led to his own demise. So, irony alert, the man who once said, I can only say what God tells me, ended up dying because he told people to go against God. His story is a cautionary tale, playing both sides of good and evil, will eventually backfire. In the end, Balaam's name became synonymous with greed and deceit in the Bible. So check out, Second Peter and Revelation for some Balaam name drops. Yep, his name got mentioned but a couple times. And that is it for chapter 31. All right, chapter 32. After the dramatic war, we pivot to a real estate discussion. So this chapter begins with the tribes of Reuben and Gad eyeing some prime real estate on the east side of the Jordan River. These two tribes had a lot of livestock. Think cowboys of Israel, and as they gaze over the land of Jazer and Gilead, they see sprawling pasture land. So lush hills, ample waters, space for days, basically cow paradise. It's like when you're driving past green open fields and your pets in the back seat starts wagging their tails. So Reuben and Gad's livestock practically moo in approval. So the leaders of Reuben and Gad approach Moses, Eleazar, and the other chiefs. They list off the names of the towns in that region, which are Ataroth, Dibon, Jazer, Nimrah, Heshbon, Elileh. I'm saying these wrong. I'm just completely butchering these names. Sebam, Nebo, and beyond, and then there's more. And say, the land that the Lord subdued before the congregation of Israel is a land for cattle, and your servants have cattle. In plain speech, Moses, this area is perfect for our herds, and well, we happen to have lots of herds. Hint, hint. So they come with their own proposals. If we have found favor in your sight, let this land be given to your servants as a possession. Do not make us cross the Jordan. So, Moses hears, do not make us cross the Jordan, and his face falls. You can almost see the flashbacks in his eyes. Last time someone said, we don't want to go into the land, it was the 10 faithless spies in the whole nation chickening out, of entering Canaan 40 years ago. So that fiasco triggered God's wrath and an entire generation's death in the wilderness. Moses is not about to let history repeat itself on his watch. So he lights into the Reubenites and Gadites. Tell your fellow Israelites, go to war whilst, you sit here. Why will you discourage the hearts of the Israelites from going over into the land that the Lord has given them? So he basically says, are you seriously going to just kick back with your cows while your brothers fight for the promised land? This is going to demoralize everyone. Moses even compares them to their fathers. Like, your fathers did this when I sent them from Kadesh Barnea to see the land. He recounts those, how those spies discourage a nation and provoke God's anger, hence the 40-year punishment. Then, delivering a gut punchline, Moses calls the Reubenites and Gadites a brood of sinners, rising up in their ancestors' place. So, ouch. He warns that if they turn away now, God might get so angry, he'll make all the people remain in the wilderness again. So, essentially, undoing all the progress. You can imagine Reuben and Gad collectively gulping. Like, this is not what they intended. So they scramble to clarify. Reuben and Gad leaders waving hands frantically, like, no, you got us wrong. We're not bailing out on our brothers, we swear. So they propose a compromise. We will build sheepfolds here for our flock and towns for our little ones, but we will take up arms and go before the Israelites until we have brought them to their place. So they promise that they'll be, the vanguard, the frontline soldiers in the conquest of Canaan. Their families, wives and children and livestock will stay in fortified cities east of Jordan for safety, but every able warrior of Reuben and God will cross the Jordan armed and ready to fight alongside the other tribes until the job is done. So they emphasize, we will not return to our homes until the Israelites have obtained their inheritance. The only catch they insist on is once the land is conquered, they won't need an inheritance west of the Jordan because they'll already have their share east of it. In short, Moses were totally committed to the conquest. Let us leave our cows and kids here and we'll fight first in line. We just want this land afterward as our permanent home. So Moses furrowed, brows starts to soften. He's gone from furious to cautiously receptive. He basically responds, all right, if you really do what you say, if every man of yours crosses the Jordan and fights until the Lord gives us victory, then fine, this land shall be yours as a possession. He lays it out as a conditional covenant. If you arm yourselves for battle and all of you cross over the Jordan until the land is subdued, then you can return guiltless, and this land east of Jordan will be yours. But if you do not do this, you will have sinned against the Lord, and be sure your sin will find you out. So there's a famous phrase for you, like, be sure your sin will find you out. So Moses basically warns them that God will know if they're lying or slack off, and consequences will follow. He encourages them, like, build your towns for your little ones and folds for your flocks, but do what you have promised. In other words, all right, cowboys, you can settle your ranches here, but you better settle up for war when the time comes. No excuses. So Reuben and God breathe a sigh of relief and eagerly agree. Your servant will do as my Lord commands. They vow again that their dependents will stay in Gilead cities, and their servants, everyone armed for war, will cross over for battle before the Lord. It's a deal. Moses then makes it official in front of Eleazar the priest, Joshua, who will lead Israel next, and the head of the other tribes. He basically announces Reuben and God will have Gilead as a possession if they fulfill their promise and fight with us. If they don't, they'll have to settle in Canaan like everyone else. All the leaders nod, accountability set. Moses doesn't want any misunderstanding later. Everybody hears the terms loud and clear. At this point, an interesting addition happens. Half the tribe of Manasseh is also given land in this region. Manasseh wasn't part of the initial request, but apparently a clan of Manassites, descendants of Machir, son of Manasseh, had already been conquering parts of Gilead themselves. Maybe they tagged along in the battles against King Og and King Sihon earlier. Moses includes them in the inheritance. So in the end, Moses gives the kingdom of Sihon and Og, that whole Transjordan area from the Arnon River up to Bashan, to Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh as their territory. They don't have to wait for Joshua's lottery to know their land. They've got it now, as long as they still uphold their end of the bargain. The chapter concludes by describing how these tribes set up shop in their new land. The Gadites rebuilt and fortified cities like Dibon, Ataroth, Aroer, Jazer, Jogbeha, Beth Nimrah, and Beth Haran, making them secure and building sheepfolds galore for all the animals. The Reubenites rebuilt Heshbon, Eliele, Kiriathaim, Nebo, Baal Meon. Some names got changed in the process, likely to erase pagan references. And then Shibma. They even renamed some of the towns they rebuilt. Nothing says, we own this place, like giving it a new name. As for the Manassites, the clan of Machir takes the region of Gilead and settle there. Manassite leader named Jair captures a group of villages and names them Havoth Jair, which literally means villages of Jair. Humble guy. Another fellow, Noba, goes and captures a town called Kenath and its surrounding villages, and you guess it, renames it Noba after himself. So essentially, these tribes are conquering and customizing their territory In a modern sense, it's like moving into a new home and immediately you're painting and renovating to make it your own. So they're establishing a firm presence east of Jordan. And thus, by the end of this chapter, the stage is set. Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh are happily settling on the east side. Their cows grazing contentedly on Gilead's hills, but they've given a solemn pledge to Moses and the entire nation that when the campaign for Canaan begins, they'll be there on the front lines. So crisis averted, unity preserved, Moses' blood pressure returns to normal. Israel can move forward without a divided heart. So in the book of Joshua, that these tribes indeed keep their words, fighting shoulder to shoulder with Israel. So it does say that there. Okay. And only after Canaan is largely conquered do they return home across the river. Mission accomplished. But that's a story for another day. All right. Fun fact corner. The phrase, your sin will find you out. This ominous phrase comes straight from Moses in verse 23, and it echoed often in literature and sermons. It was Moses' way of saying, you might fool us, but you can't fool God. Funnily enough, I say this to my daughter all the time because kids, they like to be sneaky and do all these things, and they like to lie and all that, pushing boundaries. And I always tell her, like, hey, you can lie, but Jesus always knows, and I tell her this. But anyways, you can fool me, but you cannot fool God. So if you flake on this commitment, God will ensure the consequences surface. So over time, the saying, took on general life wisdom. Hidden wrongdoings tend to reveal itself eventually. It's like the Bible's version of what goes around comes around. A good one to remember when tempted to say, eat your roommate's cake or hope no one notices. The truth has a way of coming out, especially if it's chocolate on your face. Kids do that all the time too. My daughter, like, it's just me and her, right? So when something is out of place or when there's a mess in the kitchen and I see it and she's like, Mommy, there was a mess in the kitchen, but I didn't do it. Who did it then? Me? Did I do it? So kids are very notorious when it comes to these things. But anyways, that is it for chapter 32. All right, chapter 33. So buckle up. It's time for a road trip recap. This chapter is essentially Moses' detailed travel log of Israel's journey from Egypt to the plains of Moab. It's like one of those montage sequences in a movie where they show a red line moving across a map with place names popping up, except Moses writes out every stop. So why the list? The Bible text says Moses wrote down their starting points stage by stage by command of the Lord. So God actually told Moses to record all their encampment. This is important institutional memory for Israel. It's also an impressive feat of memory and or record keeping. Imagine keeping track of of 4 decades of campsites, but Moses, under God's direction, does it, giving credit to God's guidance through every stage of the journey. It's a testimony that every step, even the ones where Israel messed up, was part of God's faithfulness. All right, so now let's get through the greatest hits of this itinerary. So first one, Egypt to the Red Sea. The journey starts in Ramses, which is in Egypt, on the day after the first Passover, the 15th day of the first month. So Israel marched out boldly while the Egyptians were back home, bearing their firstborn casualties of the 10th plague. Yeah. So from Ramses, the Israelite traveled to Succoth, then to Etham on the edge of the wilderness. Now, Red Sea drama and Mara. This is the second. Next, they turned back to Hahiroth, opposite of Baal Zephon, and camped near Migdol. That's the spot by the Red Sea where the Pharaoh's chariots nearly trapped them. Here's the cool part. Moses notes they passed through the sea into the wilderness, which is in the Bible's understated way of saying we walk through the Red Sea on dry ground, no biggie. 3 days later, they camp at Mara, where the water was bitter until God miraculously made it sweet. Now we have Elim, Oasis, and Sinai. So from Mara, they went to Elim, Um, Elim, the lush oasis with 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees. Um, After Elim, they camped by the Red Sea again, then moved into the wilderness of Sin. That's where the manna first rained down and quail flew in for dinner, a pivotal place of God's provision. From Sin, they went to Dafka, then Alush, then Rephidim. Rephidim rings a bell. It's where there was no water, and Moses struck the rock to bring water out of the thirsty people. Also, Amalek attacked them there and was defeated while Moses held up his staff. So busy times in Rephidim. Then we have Sinai and beyond. So next stop, the wilderness of Sinai. So Israel camped at Mount Sinai for about a year. That's where they received the Ten Commandments, built the tabernacle, and basically became a formal nation under God's covenant. Surprisingly, Moses doesn't linger on Sinai in this list. He just names it as one of the stations, but we know it was a big deal. After Sinai, they journeyed on to Kibroth Hattava, which literally means graves of craving. Um, it's named that way because that's where the people gorge on quail in an unholy, KFC binge, and a bunch of them died in a plague of food poisoning. So that place was memorable for all the reasons. From there to Hazeroth, where Miriam got leprosy for a week after criticizing Moses. Then on to a series of lesser known locales, such as, and I'm going to butcher a lot of these names of the places: Rithma, Rimon Perez, Libna, Riza, Kehelatha, Mount Shefer, Harada, Macheloth, Tahath, Terah, Mithka, Hashmona, Moseroth, Bene Jacan, Hor Hagidgad, Jothbatha, and Abrana. So if you zone out, don't worry, many of those places are only mentioned here. Even archaeologists scratch their heads at some of them. They might have been small water holes or camps that's known at the time, but lost to history. The point is, Israel zigzagged quite a bit. All right, then we have Kadesh and Aaron's death. So eventually they reach Kadesh in the wilderness of Zin. Kadesh, also called Kadesh Barnea, was a major hub. It's where the 12 spies were sent from and where Israel camped for a long time. Nearly 38 of the 40 years were spent around Kadesh. Kadesh is where Moses struck the rock in anger and was told he wouldn't enter the promised land. Many significant events happened there, though Moses doesn't rehash those here. He sticks to the travel outline. So from Kadesh, they came to Mount Hor on the border of Edom. This is where Aaron and the high priest died, as God had announced. Moses details that Aaron died on the first day of the 5th month of the 40th year since leaving Egypt at the age of 123. So side note, 123 years old. Aaron had a good long run. He was 3 years older than Moses, who will die at 120. They were, a long-lived family. The mention of Aaron's death gives a timestamp to the journey. They're now in year 40. So, end of an era. The original high priest is gone, and his son Eleazar is now in charge of the priesthood. Now we have Arad to Moab. So after Hor, the Canaanite king of Arad heard Israel was coming. So indeed we know from earlier, which specifically in Numbers chapter 21, that Arad fought Israel, and some Israelites even named the place Hormah after defeating them. So Moses' list doesn't give details, just a nod that news of Israel was spreading. They then set out from Mount Hor to Zalmonah, to Punan, to Oboth, to Abarim on the edge of Moab. Next, Dibon Gad, and then Almon Diblathaim, and into the mountains of Abarim facing Nebo. Finally, they come down to the plains of Moab and camp by the Jordan River. From Beth Jeshimoth as far as Abel Shittim, and that is the current location. Plains of Moab by the Jordan across from Jericho. They made it. From Ramses in Egypt all the way to Jordan across from Jericho, Moses lists 42 stages of the journey. So 42 encampments in 40 years. Quite the itinerary. Each name holds a memory of challenge, failure, provision, or growth. It's like reading the chapter titles of Israel's wilderness diary. And for the new generation hearing this, it's a crash course in where we've been and what God has done. Every stop testifies to God's patience and guidance. As one commentary puts it, the list is presented almost in the style of a royal record of conquest, as if to say, look at all the places God triumphed and brought us through. Now the travel. So after the travelogue, God speaks to Moses one more time in this chapter with instructions for the conquest of Canaan. It's like, what to do upon arrival checklist. So God says, when you cross the Jordan into the land of Canaan, you must drive out all the inhabitants of the land before you. This includes demolishing their idols, stone figures, and high places, pagan shrines. Basically, cleanse the land of all the Canaanite religious stuff. Then God says, you shall take possession of the land and settle in it, for I have given you the land to possess. The land is a gift, but they must actively take it and purge it of wickedness. So he instructs them to apportion the land by lot among the tribes. Larger tribes get a larger inheritance, smaller tribes a smaller one. So proportionately, make it proportionate, equal and fair. But the lot, think of drawing straws or casting lots guided by God, will decide which tribe gets which territory. So this prevents squabbling. Everyone will know their spot is God assigned. So then comes a stern warning. If you do not drive out the inhabitants of the land from before you, then those you let remain shall be barbs in your eyes and thorns in your eyes. Thorns in your sides. They will give you trouble in the land where you live. So, barbs in your eyes. That's a painful image. God is saying, any Canaanite you spare or cohabit with will become constant irritants and adversaries. They'll tempt you with their idolatry or resent you and plot against you. Basically, they will sabotage your enjoyment of the land. And God doesn't stop there. And I will do to you as I thought to do to them. So in plain terms, if you fail to obey me and cleanse the land, the judgment that was due for the Canaanite sins will fall on you instead. That is a chilling warning. It's God's way of stressing, I'm giving you this land, but it's not a free-for-all. There's a mandate of holiness. You must not adopt the evil practices of the people I'm driving out. If you show them mercy in disobedience to me, you'll end up sharing in their corruption and their faith. So we, the audience, might go because we know the future. Spoiler alert, Israel will struggle this. Exactly this. Ugh. They didn't listen, so anyways, they don't fully drive out all the Canaanites, and those remaining do become thorns in Israel's side, leading them into idolatry repeatedly. God's warning was spot on, but that's for later. Right now, Moses is delivering it loud and clear so that the Israelites can say they weren't warned. And, that wraps up this chapter. Fun fact corner. Wow. 42 stations of the Exodus. So Moses lists 42 places from Egypt to Moab. Interestingly, some scholars note the number 42 has symbolic weight. So later, 42 generations are listed from Abraham to Jesus, etc. But here, it's likely just the actual count. These were essentially 42 miracles of guidance. Of those, less than half, about 20, are mentioned elsewhere in the Bible. The rest are unique to this list. And this shows Moses wasn't making this up after the fact. He must have kept a diary, or the Lord reminded him of each campsite. It's like uncovering old travel photos you forgot you had. Like, oh yeah, I remember Alush. Great falafel there. So many locations remain archaeologically unidentified, indicating they were probably not major centers but temporary encampments. This underscores that Israel really lived as nomads for 40 years. They didn't build cities or settle down long anywhere until the very end. The list also serves a bit like a victory parade itinerary. One commentary says it's written in a style similar to how ancient kings recorded their campaigns. Only here, the conquering hero is Yahweh, the Lord who led his people triumphantly through the desert. So kind of cool. All right, chapter 34. Congratulations, Israel. You're about to get a homeland. So in this chapter, God gives Moses a clear description of the borders of the promised land and appoints leaders to oversee its division among the tribes. It's like reading land grant document from point A to point B along the ridge, down the river, blah, blah, blah. So Moses gathers the Israelites and relays God's command. When you enter the land of Canaan, this is the land that shall fall to you as an inheritance, the land of Canaan defined by its boundaries. So time for a mental map. We'll break it down. So south border, west border, north border, east border. So on south border, God says the south boundary will run from the wilderness of Zin along Edom's borders. It starts at the end of the Salt Sea, which is the Dead Sea on the east. So envision the Dead Sea at its southern tip of the eastern side. That's the starting point. From there, the border goes south of the ascent of Akrabim. So Akrabim means Scorpion Pass, an ancient road by that name, and then across to Zin, keeping Kadesh Barnea just to its north. I wish I can show you the map. I forgot my other Bible that has all the stuff. So then it goes on to Hazar Adar and over to Azmon. Finally, it turns and follows the Brook of Egypt until it hits the Mediterranean Sea, the Great Sea. The Brook of Egypt, not the Nile, but a smaller one, which is El Arish, is the southwestern edge. So essentially, the southern border runs from the mid-Dead Sea west southwest to the Mediterranean. That covers the northern edge of the Sinai Peninsula. So Canaan's southern limit roughly separates it from Sinai or Egypt's territory. Wow, that was a lot. So western border, easy peasy. The Mediterranean Sea is the entire western border. So God says, for your western boundaries, you shall have the Great Sea and its coast. So from the Brook of Egypt point in the south up to the coastline of the Mediterranean all the way. And you've seen a map of Israel. If you've seen a map of Israel, you know the Mediterranean shoreline from Gaza up to Lebanon. That's the west border beachfront boundary. So it's kind of nice, I guess, by the beachfront. All right, northern border. Now it gets interesting because he describes points that are harder to pinpoint today. And I'm still having a headache. So God says, from the Great Sea, mark a line to Mount Hor. So yeah, Mount Hor. Didn't Aaron die there? Different Mount Hor, actually. It's confusing. So this Mount Hor is in the far north, not the one in Edom. So it might be part of the Taurus range or somewhere near the Lebanon mountains. From that northern Mount Hor, the border goes through Lebo Hamath. Lebo Hamath means entrance of Hamath. So Hamath was a kingdom or city far north in today's Syria. So we're talking the uppermost reach near where the Orontes River flows. Then the border extends to Zedab, then to Ziphron, ending at Hazar Enan. We might not know these spots exactly, but scholars think it's describing a line that goes eastward from the Mediterranean, perhaps cutting across the area south of modern-day Homs in Syria, over towards the Damascus region. In essence, the northern border is up near where Lebanon and Syria meet today. It's pretty far north, certainly including the Galilee region, probably the northern Becca Valley area. God says, "This shall be your northern boundary." Oh, was a lot. Anyways, historically, Israel did reach up to Lebo Hamath, so these boundaries were indeed realized, at least briefly. All right, eastern border. Lastly, God outlines the eastern boundary from Hazar Enan Point in the far northeast. Draw a line down to Shepham, then down to Ribla on the right side of Ain. Continue the line south to the eastern slope of the Sea of Chinnereth. That's the Sea of Galilee. So imagine a line coming down basically along what became the border between later Israel and Syria, likely following east of the Upper Jordan and the Golan Heights down to Galilee. Then from the Sea of Galilee, the border goes down to the Jordan River and ends at the Dead Sea. Essentially, the Jordan River forms the eastern boundary. Since two and a half tribes were east of Jordan, this description only applies to the land west of Jordan. So, summarizing, the eastern border of Canaan proper ran from probably modern Syria down to Jordan Valley to the Dead Sea. Oh, gosh. Simplified, God defined a territory roughly from the Sinai Desert in the south to Lebanon in the north, and from the Mediterranean Sea in the west to the Jordan River in the east. My head! It's basically the land of modern Israel, Palestine, plus bits of Lebanon and Syria. Notably, it did not include everything God had ever promised Abraham, like up to the Euphrates. Those were perhaps ideal borders at the time, but this is the core idea for the tribes. Uh, it was a lot. So after detailing the borders, Moses tells the Israelites, "This is the land you shall apportion by lot among the 9.5 tribes." Why 9.5? Because as Moses reminds them, Reuben and Gad and half of Manasseh already got the inheritance of the east side of the Jordan, so they won't get a share in the western territory. So the lot system means they will cast lots to see which tribe gets which section. Oh, so now God also provides a list of appointed leaders to handle the land allocation. Basically, these guys will work with Eleazar, the priest, and Joshua to divide the land. First, God names Eleazar and Joshua and the chief administrators of the whole process. Then one leader from each of the tribes getting land is listed. For Judah, they have Caleb, son of Jephunneh. So yes, that Caleb, the brave spy. Then for Simeon, Shamuel, son of Amihud. Not to be confused with the prophet Samuel centuries later. This is a different guy. For Benjamin, you have Elidad, son of Kislon. For Dan, Buki, son of Jogli. So full name alert. Buki. So maybe pronounced Bookie or Bookai. I don't know. However you say it, it's kind of cute. And then for Manasseh, the half tribe of the west side, they have Haniel, son of Ephod. For Ephraim, Kemuel, son of Shiftan. For Zebulun, they have Eli Zaphan, son of Parnak. For Issachar, they have Paltiel, son of Azan. And then for Asher, they have Ahihud, son of Shelomi. For Naphtali, lastly for Naphtali, they have Pedashel, son of Amihud. Whew. So that's 10 names corresponding to 10 tribal allocations. Each of these men was likely a respected elder or chief in his tribe. So their job, survey, allocate, and ensure everyone gets their fair share, according to God's guidance. It was a big responsibility. You know, you had to be trustworthy and maybe good at geometry. The list also must have felt, you know, exciting. It's like reading the credits of the future. These guys will actually lead the people into settling the land. Moses includes by saying, these are the ones whom the Lord commanded to apportion the inheritance to the Israelites in Canaan. It quietly hints Moses himself will not be doing the apportioning. He knows Joshua and his chieftains will handle it after he's gone. Moses is basically setting everything up for a smooth transition. He's tying a bow on his leadership by delegating the final task to the generation of leaders. What a leader. He's not micromanaging brave. He's empowering others to finish the mission. Oh wow. So that's chapter 34. Well, all right. I don't know. All right. Tribal tidbit. Oh, fun fact corner. Tribal tidbit. So you might notice Levi wasn't mentioned because Levi got no land inheritance, right? So their inheritance was the Lord and the priesthood. Also, Joseph's two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, each became separate tribes with land, which maintained the number 12, of land holding tribes, even without Levi. Okay. So this was all established earlier, but here we see it in action. No leader listed for Levi, and we have Joseph effectively represented by Ephraim and Manasseh's leaders. So if you love math, 12 tribes minus 1 Levi equals 11 plus 2 for Joseph's two sons equals 13. Since Manasseh is split into half east and half west, it's still counted as one tribe in the allotment, which is equals back to 12 territories. Confusing a little, but it worked out perfectly on the ground. Anyways, that's it. That's it for chapter 34. All right, chapter 35. Now that the tribal territories are defined, Moses addresses a special category, the Levites. Remember, the tribe of Levi doesn't get a region of land like the others. Instead, God provides for them by commanding that each tribe give up some of their towns to the Levites to live in. So this chapter opens with God telling Moses, command the Israelites to give the Levites town to live in from the inheritance of their possession and pasture lands around the towns. So the Levites, being the priests and temple servants, will be spread out among the tribes, presumably to minister and teach God's law everywhere. Moses relays that each tribe is to allocate a number of cities to the Levites in proportion to the size of their own inheritance. Larger tribes contribute more towns, smaller tribes fewer, fair and square. In total, the Levites are to receive 48 cities to call home with their pasture lands. Pasture land meaning a belt of land around each city. For their cattle and flocks. So this way, the Levites can also keep livestock and sustain themselves. Essentially, every Levite city would have a suburban green belt where their sheep could graze. Among the 48 Levite towns, 6 are to have the special status, cities of refuge, where, yeah. So we've arrived at a fascinating biblical institution. God says, select 6 cities of refuge to which a person who kills someone accidentally may flee. 3 of these refuge cities will be on the east side of the Jordan, and making 6 total. Yeah, so they're meant to be spread out so that no matter where an incident happens, a refuge city isn't too far away. These cities are for anyone, Israelites or foreigner residing among them who kills a person unintentionally. It's like an early form of protective custody to prevent vigilante justice. Okay, so let's unpack the scenario. So in ancient Israel, if someone was killed, the nearest relative of the deceased was typically duty bound to avenge the blood. This person was called Avenger of Blood. In Hebrew, it's called Goel Hadam. It was their family honor to ensure a murderer didn't live. But what if the killing was an accident? Without a legal process, the avenger might slay someone who didn't mean to cause death. That's where the refuge cities come, to inject a measure of justice and due process into a society where blood feuds could otherwise run rampant. Okay, so say you're chopping wood and your axe head flies off and tragically kills your neighbor. Truly an accident. What do you do? According to this law, you drop everything and run to the nearest city of refuge. There, you're safe from the Avenger of Blood until you can stand trial before the community. The elders of that city, likely the Levites guiding the process, would hear the case to distinguish if the killing was indeed unintentional or if there was malice involved. Moses lays out the rule. If it's found that you struck someone with an iron object or stone or wooden weapon deliberately and they died, and you shoved someone in, or you shove someone in hatred or ambush them, and in all those cases, that's murder. The verdict: the murderer shall be put to death. The avenger of blood has the right to execute the murderer once guilt has established. So no sanctuary for murder. The refuge city is not allowed to harbor a willful killer. Justice must be served. However, if the death was accident, like you push someone accidentally without malice, or maybe you drop a stone by mistake and it hit someone with no previous grudge or intent to harm, then it's really manslaughter, not murder. In that case, the community must protect the slayer from the avenger. They essentially render a verdict of not guilty of murder, and they escort the slayer back to the city of refuge where he must remain. The person is safe there. But here's the catch. They have to stay within the refuge city until a certain event. They can't just go home freely immediately. They must live in the city of refuge until the death of the high priest who is in office at that time. So only after the high priest dies can they return to their own town without fear. If they leave the refuge city before the high priest's death and the avenger finds them outside, well, all bets are off. The avenger can kill them, and no blood guilt shall be on him for doing so. Essentially, leaving early is at your own risk. The protection only works within the city limits. Whew, wow. So, why the high priest death? It's not explicitly explained in the Bible, but many have speculated the high priest death might symbolize a kind of atonement or closure for the community. It also served as a time marker. High priests didn't die super often, but when they did, it could be seen as a generational turnover. Releasing the manslayer at the point prevented them from being a permanent exile. Some waited maybe a few years, some potentially decades, depending on the high priest's longevity. It added a poignant note. The high priest's life was so valuable that his death essentially resets things, allowing inadvertent slayers to go free without vendetta. There's even a hint of foreshadowing there. Later, Christian theology compares it to how the death of our high priest, Jesus, sets us free from the guilt. But in the immediate context, it's just how the legal system worked, a merciful limit on how long someone had to stay in asylum. Moses also emphasizes no ransom is allowed. You can't pay money to bribe your way out of a murder sentence. A murderer must face execution. Life for life, no buying freedom. And you can't pay to get out of refuge city early either. Justice can't be cheated by the rich or, the well-connected. This was a just and equitable principle, contrasting with some ancient cultures where wealthy murderers might wiggle out of punishment with blood money. So not in Israel. If you shed innocent blood, you pay with your own blood, period. And if you were innocent, your protection is granted freely, not sold. Wow. Yeah. Anyways. All right. Fun fact corner. Do I have anything? Name of the refuge cities. So though Numbers 35 doesn't list them by name, later in Joshua, the book of Joshua, you find out the 6 cities designated. On the west, it is Kadesh in Naphtali, Shechem and Hebron, aka Kiriath Arba. On the east, we have Bezer, Ramoth Gilead, and Golan. If Golan sounds familiar, yes, it's the same Golan as in Golan Heights today. These locations were chosen so that from north to south, east to west, a refuge city was accessible, according to later Jewish tradition. Roads to refuge cities were kept in good repair, wide, and had signposts at crossroads saying refuge to guide fugitives. They really took the system seriously. It also said that the mothers of high priests would compassionately provide food and clothing to those in the refuge city, so they wouldn't curse their sons for living so long and keeping them confined. Like, how about that for a fun human touch? Human touch. All right, chapter 36. All right. So, remember the five daughters of Zelophehad, which are Mala, Nola, Hogla, Bilka, and Tirzah, who earlier in Numbers 27 bravely asked for their father's inheritance since he died without sons. So they got the thumbs up from God and Moses to inherit land in Manasseh. It was a landmark ruling for women's rights in that era. Well, apparently this created a new question in the minds of the relatives. So this chapter opens with the heads of Zelophehad's clan approaching Moses and the leaders with a concern. The delegation says, Moses, sir, the Lord commanded that Zelophehad's daughters get their dad's inheritance. That's fine, but if they end up marrying men from another tribe of Israel, then their land will effectively transfer to that other tribe's ownership. So at the Jubilee year, when all the lands are supposed to revert to the original family ownership, their land would slide over to the tribe into which they married, diminishing, our tribe's portion. In short, we're worried about losing part of Manasseh's land if these ladies marry outside of our tribe. It's a valid logistic concern because God had said each tribe's inheritance shouldn't permanently change hands between tribes. But if Zelophehad's daughters married into, say, the tribe of Ephraim come Jubilee, their inherited land would belong to their husband's family in Ephraim, not revert to Manasseh, since technically it's in the hands of a different tribe now. Over generations, intertribal marriage could shuffle the tribal land like a deck of cards, um, undermining the clear tribal boundaries just established. Manasseh's elders are basically shouting, "We could lose territory." Moses takes the issue to God, and God gives the ruling. Moses announces, the tribe of Joseph speaks correctly. Their concern is legit, so here's the command. Zelophehad's daughters may marry anyone they please as long as it's within their own tribal clan, the tribe of Manasseh. In fact, this sets a general law. Every daughter who possesses an inheritance in any tribe of Israel shall marry one from the clan of her father's tribe, so that the inheritance transfers from tribe to tribe. Each Israelite tribe shall keep hold of its own ancestral inheritance. So now note, this didn't mean women couldn't marry outside their tribe at all. Only, those rare women who inherited land had this restriction. If a daughter had brothers, she wasn't a land heir and thus could marry, wherever without affecting land distribution. But in cases like Zelophehad's daughters who were heiresses, this rule kicked in. It's a kind of patrimony protection law. We might see it as limiting the daughter's choice, but apparently the daughters of Zelophehad didn't mind. They understood the importance of not fragmenting their tribe's inheritance. So what did the five sisters do? So they did as the Lord commanded Moses. They each married sons of their father's brothers. In other words, they married their cousins within the Manasseh tribe. By marrying cousins, they ensured, and this is common in that time to keep family property consolidated. They ensured the land parcel they inherit stays in the extended family. Their inheritance remains with the tribe of Manasseh exactly as the law required. So not only are these women bold and wise in securing their inheritance, they're also obedient and community minded in how they handled it. They marry who they think best, and conveniently those who they thought were best were from their own tribe. The text doesn't romanticize it, but it's like, but I like to imagine maybe they found some decent guy among their cousins. Okay, with that situation resolved, the book of Numbers ends with this line. These are the commandments and ordinances that the Lord commanded to Israel through Moses in the plains of Moab by the Jordan opposite Jericho. Wow. Oh, all right. I don't really have any fun fact corner here. But yeah. Anyways, so Israel is on the brink of a new dawn. The wilderness chapter closes and a conquest chapter opens. Um, what will happen when they cross that river? Will this new generation keep the faith where their parents faltered? Moses won't be leading them there. A new leader, Joshua, is already ready to take the helm. So the book of Numbers leaves us with bated, breath. In the very next installment of the story, Moses will climb up the mountain to glimpse the land and then pass the torch. The people will enter Canaan, face fortified cities and giants again, but this time with lessons learned. Anyways, I don't want to, you know, give more cliffhangers, or not cliffhangers. Is it cliffhangers? Spoilers or cliffhangers. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed the ride. Yes, even the bizarre parts with talking donkeys and bronze serpents. Personally, I love, digging into these stories with you and finding both humor and hope in them. The Bible isn't some dry old scroll. It is so alive, literally alive, with real people and God who loves them and us. So, if you've stuck with me through the Levitical censuses and wilderness camping records, you can handle anything. So until, our next Bible adventure, stay curious, stay hopeful, and remember, even in the wild times of life, God is with you every step of the way. Until then, I'll see you on the next book, which is the book of Deuteronomy.